Well, 20 years after the Assyrians decimate the northern kingdom of Israel and deport the 10 tribes to the area of modern-day Kurdistan, they are back in 701. Sennacherib, the Assyrian monarch who took the throne just 3 years earlier in 704, and who rules until 684, I think, sets his sights on the southern portion of the kingdom that had recently been conquered by his predecessors, and the southern portion is Judah and Philistia. We are remarkably well informed in multiple ways about Sennacherib's activities. First of all, he left several records, the same records, but on many different objects that are called prisms, because they are these prismatic limestone cubes on which his deeds were recorded. And Sennacherib, like all great kings, has wonderful introductory sections to his annals, and his are so great that they are worth reading and mulling on. Sennacherib, the great king, king of the world, king of Assyria, king of the four quarters, the wise shepherd, favorite of the great gods, guardian of right, lover of justice, who lends support, who comes to the aid of the destitute, who performs pious acts, perfect hero, mighty man, the powerful one who consumes the insubmissive, just in case you didn't get the idea from the beginning of this that you were supposed to lay down, who strikes the wicked with the thunderbolt. The god Assur has made powerful my weapons. Like all Near Eastern leaders from time immemorial until today, God is on their side. This is a feature of this part of the world. So for Sennacherib, it was the god Assur, who has made powerful my weapons. From the upper sea of the setting sun to the lower sea of the rising sun. He has a large-scale campaign in the year 701, and we will see the effects of both sides of it today. The second half of it is against Judah. As for Hezekiah the Judite, who did not submit to my yoke, 46 of his strong-walled cities, 46 walled cities, as well as the small towns in their area, which were without number. You get the sense of a densely populated area, a densely settled and built up area. Judah is not large. Judah is pretty tiny. It's about 25 kilometers, 30 kilometers in each direction, the core of the highlands. So 46 strong-walled cities, small towns, which were without number, by leveling with battering rams and bringing up siege engines, by attacking and storming on foot, by mines, tunnels, and breaches, I besieged and took them. You may recall the number that was exiled from Samaria and the north in 722, 721. It was 1/4 of this number. 200,150 people, great and small, male and female, horses, mules, asses, camels, cattle, and sheep without number, I brought away and counted as spoil. Hezekiah himself, this is a poetic flight of fancy that one must admire Sennacherib for. Like a caged bird, I shut up in Jerusalem, his royal city. And in the always more terse and to the point Hebrew Bible, in the 14th year of King Hezekiah's reign, Sennacherib of Assyria attacked all the fortified cities of Judah and captured them. Knowing that the Assyrians were on their way, gave purpose to Hezekiah's activities in Jerusalem as well as elsewhere in Judah, and we have good archaeological evidence for the response. The archaeological evidence that I'm about to show you, impressive in and of itself, kind of mesmerizing when we can connect it with this dramatic set of historical actions, but also illustrative of the manpower and technical know-how able to be mounted in a hurry by the king. When Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib intended to make war in Jerusalem, he consulted with his officials about two things. One, blocking off the water from the springs outside the city. Of course, that's the Gihon spring, the access for which is on the bottom end of the eastern edge of the slope of the city of David, outside the walls. A large force of men assembled, and they blocked the stream that flowed through the land. And the ultimate aim of that activity is also explained in 2 Kings 20. As for the other events of Hezekiah's reign, how he made the pool and the tunnel by which he brought water into the city, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? So one is bringing water into the city. Unlike the large fortified cities, Beersheba, other cities, just as the cities of the north had big water systems, cities of the south that were built up had big water systems inside the walls. Jerusalem, having been built up piece by piece organically, not settled all at once as a single fortified entity, just took advantage of its own natural spring and did not, up until this point, have a water system inside the city. The other thing that Hezekiah does is he worked hard repairing all the broken sections of the wall and building towers on it, and he built another wall outside that one in the you know how when you get a paper back from a teacher and you thought that everything that you said was completely clear, but the teacher would write something like, what would that one mean? This is an evidence of a non-editorial hand in the book of 2 Chronicles, because one would like an antecedent to the pronoun, the indefinite pronoun, but there isn't one. Unfortunately, archaeology has provided us with an explanation. About, let's see, I have this measurement here somewhere, 300 meters west of the Temple Mount, in this area right here of the western hill, the hill that you recall was now already settled in the 8th century, not earlier. Earlier, all the settlement is in the city of David, but by the 8th century, with the invasions of Assyria in the north, refugees coming down into Judah and some into Jerusalem had settled on this part of the city. This part of the city was undefended. There was no fortification wall. The walls were just around the city of David. But here, now, for the first time, a fortification wall is going to be built, and that is the wall that the indefinite antecedent of 2 Chronicles is referring to. And this wall was built directly on bedrock. Here's a person standing here to give you a sense of scale, and another person here leaning up against the preserved height. The preserved height is 4 meters. It was clearly much, much taller originally. 65 meters of it have been exposed in excavation. It is 7 meters wide, so it's really massive. Built directly on bedrock, but on either side of the wall are the destroyed remnants of houses and spare pottery, domestic pottery. So people who had been living in a kind of unorganized way in the settlement on the Western Hill, the wall that Hezekiah builds goes right over that, the areas of parts of their settlement, because the wall follows the most defensible crest line of the Western Hill. So there's a little bit of a slope. On the outside of it, you see a bend in the wall, and that bend is right here. So this is the area that Hezekiah encloses now for the first time, and you get a sense of the size of Jerusalem now in the time of right before the Assyrian invasion of 701, so at the latter part of the 8th century. Settlement up here on the hill, settlement here in the city of David. The Ophel, the area where public buildings would have been, and possibly the palatial compound, unless the palatial compound was right up here on the top of the Temple Mount next to the temple itself. The second of Hezekiah's construction adventures was to bring the waters of the Gihon spring inside the city. This was a monumental engineering undertaking because the Gihon spring is way down at the bottom of the slope of the city of David, and up here inside the city of David is much higher. So So a tunnel to bring the water in, first of all, since water does not flow upward, you have to get down very far below the crest of the city of David, down as low as the level of the water would be outside at the bottom of the hill. And then you have to make a tunnel throughout that entire length to get there. The tunnel is known. We have it. You can walk through it. I have done it. I suggest those water shoes, because there's very slippery rock underneath. And sometimes it can get up to the water can get up to about here on you, but it is a continuously flowing stream. It's an amazing undertaking. So here's the entrance to it. Come down some steps, and the entrance is right here at the Gihon Spring. And you can walk all the way through it. It's 530 meters, or 1,749 feet long. The height of the channel is no more than 6 feet tall, so for somebody like me, it was perfectly fine, but for somebody a little bit taller, you'd have to duck in parts. Here you see this fellow's head is just about at the top of the channel. It takes some crazy turns in all sorts of spots. And we know how it was done from two kinds of evidence. One are the angle of the axe marks on the limestone walls that reflect the direction in which the workmen were hitting the rock to carve their way through. And the other way we know is that there's an inscription at the meeting point, because people came from both ends and met, not exactly in the middle, because the people who came from the end where the pool comes out inside the city of David first had to get down all that level. And so as a consequence, this inscription, this large inscription, which was on the wall inside the tunnel at the point where the two teams met, is much closer to the pool end inside the city of David, because it took those guys longer. And it's a very dramatic story. A bit of the first line is gone, so we just have this, we know that the subject of it is probably something like, and now I'm going to explain about the breakthrough. This was the manner of the breakthrough. While the stonecutters were still wielding the axe, each man towards his fellow, and while there were still 3 cubits to cut through, they heard the sound of each man calling to his fellow. In other words, one team heard the other team through a cleft in the rock, and there's this word that nobody knows what it means, zada, which must mean something like a fissure or an opening in the rock. And on the day of the breakthrough, the stonecutters struck each man towards his fellow, not meaning that they were hitting each other, meaning that they were working in tandem, axe against axe, and the waters flowed from the source to the pool for 1,200 cubits, and 100 cubits was the height of the rock above the head of the stonecutters, meaning that the place from the inside the city of David, that's as far down as they had to go, not 100 cubits high in the tunnel, obviously. That wasn't the case. Oh, I don't know. That would be a... Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. An original, well, that would be the Egyptian cubit. So whether that's this cubit. And, there are people who work on this sort of thing. Ancient measurements, there are people who love this stuff. All you number-oriented folks, get in touch. We'll give you some. Right, but the question is whether it's a standardized measure. Sure. How are they able to be precise enough? Let's go back and look at the path. And you will see that they were not precise. And here's the meeting point. So the meeting point, they meet at almost right angles. And actually, this is a simplified plan, because at the point right before the meeting, it's almost like you make a whole bunch of practically right-hand turns. So they were getting closer, and they could sort of hear each other, and they were kind of navigating periodically, and then finally they got close enough to go through. But it's clearly a very hectic affair, and the depth is planned out, but the route is a little less so. Yeah. It has. It has. It's been open continuously, and in fact, the reason that the way that the inscription was found is it was found in 1880 when a couple little boys who were swimming in the tunnel felt it. And at that time, 1880, this was part of the Ottoman Empire. And they went home and they told their parents, and their parents notified the various authorities, and the governor or whatever of Jerusalem went in with a crew, and they carved the inscription out, and that is why the inscription today is in the Archaeological Museum in Istanbul, where you can see it, because it's part of the cultural property of the Ottoman Empire, who was the imperial force at that time. So, yeah, so, I mean, and as, yeah, so kids knew about it. we're swimming in it, but it was the water supply ever after for Jerusalem, and it still is the water supply for this village, the modern one there today. Yeah.
Is there an estimate or inscription saying how long it took them to do this?
The only inscription we have is that one, and we don't know how long. Yeah. I might have some articles about the engineering of Hezekiah's tunnel. I can take a look, and if I can find one that is pithy enough, I'll put it on the website, and I'll let you guys know. Yeah, it's a monumental, amazing thing, and very fun to walk through. I suggest flashlights. All right, so in addition to the wall and the tunnel, it's possible that Hezekiah is responsible for another aspect of military preparedness for the Assyrian invasion, and that is the laying up of supplies, lots of supplies, in district headquarter places around Judah. And the evidence for this possibility is in a very fascinating and complicated and contentious category of artifact, which are called LMLK seals. And they are seals that are on the tops of jar handles of this type of jar, which is a very standardized type. And there are over 2,000 of these things, these LMLK seals, known. And almost all of them come from the area of Judah itself, and they all date to about the last third of the 8th century BCE. LMLK means to the king or of the king. That is, either it means something that is being given over to the king in a directional sense, or it means belonging to the king, or it means of, to, or belonging to the state of whom the king is the representative, or it means of, to, or belonging to a specific king who doesn't happen to be named because everybody knew who it was. So those are all possibilities for the first word of the inscription. There are 4 place names that appear on these over 2,000 inscriptions. Hebron, which is there. Soko, which is here. Ziph, which is here. And Mameshet, or Mamshit, or there are various other ways to vocalize it. And the reason that there are so many different ways to vocalize it is because we don't know where it is. We don't know what site it is. Nobody knows what site it is. But it's clearly, I mean, mem, mem, shin, taf. No mistaking the letters. We just don't know what the place is. These LMLK seals are really confusing, very fascinating, and there is a terrific website that somebody who has just decided to devote his life to the explication of these things has made, and it's called the LMLK website. And I have put a link to that website on the, it's in one of the folders on the website and whatever the folder is that's got links to articles and other stuff. So I encourage you to check it out there. So here are some things that we know about these seals. Chemical analysis of jars and seals show that almost all of them are made of the same clay. And the clay source is probably from the area of the Shvela. There are actually, for each of the place names, many, up to 10 or 15 different designs, little letterings. But all of the seals have been identified by carver's hand, and there are no more than 5 different people responsible for carving the seals that these stamps are made from. There is no correlation between the place name stamped on the handle and the place where the handles are found. Like none. Now, here are some possible explanations for what these things mean. One, they are the representative of taxation districts in Judah. So taxes would have been collected in kind, like they were in Samaria, oil, grain, wine, inside these jars. And the jars were collected eventually, or intended to be collected, for these zones, taxation zones. Another is that they are the representative also of commodities being collected in kind, but instead of tax, they are for military buildup. They're for military supplies. A third is that they don't have anything to do with those with military tax at all, but are jars that would have held wine or oil for the king's supplies, in the way that in much later times there were supplies brought in for the high priests of the temple in Jerusalem in the Second Temple period. And so that these are wine-growing districts, districts where viticulture is practiced. And a fourth possibility is that they are for religious ties. That is, they are the representative goods from these districts that are intended for Jerusalem. There is a little bit of evidence in support of all of these, and nothing compelling necessarily for any one. You have a question?
I was just wondering, are all the jars that these seals are found on, are they like a uniform?
They are totally uniform. They are standard. Yeah.
So they have some little shop maybe?
They had,
Have some like administrative shop that makes these big.
yes. They were made. They are sort of standard issue in the same way that you remember the collar rim jars from the IronIIc, and they were basically a standard sort of jar type. Now, you could think that when you have a standard jar type, it could mean that that's because the people who want the vessel ultimately want a standard unit of measure. But it could also just mean that the people who are making it are churning out a standard size and type. It not necessarily, I mean, you could fill yours up halfway and you could fill yours up 2/3 of the way. They don't have to have the same amount in them, but the people who make them in a standardized way. So you can't, that they're standardized is clearly important information. What that means, not so clear. So the place names, the 4 place names might suggest the first 2 explanations, military buildup or tax buildup. But the fact that there's no correlation between where the names show up and where the stamps of these names show up with the places that are stamped on them makes that potentially a problem. They are, the fact that 3 of them are clustered in one area is more supportive of the idea of either wine growing produce for the king, or in support of the idea of a religious tithe, is the fact that of the over 2,000 handles found, a significant percentage of them have been found in Jerusalem itself. On the other hand, Jerusalem is the capital city. If therefore either tax or military buildup, you're going to have a whole bunch of these jars being supplied to Jerusalem. So there are a lot of theories. Impossible to choose. Feel free to consult the website. A significant portion, as I said, of these handles come from Jerusalem. This is a map, incidentally. I guess I didn't explain this. This map is shows you all the sites where these handles have been found. And so you can see it's a little odd. It's sort of interesting that there are a few way up here, although that could just be, right, the jars are very nice jars, very well made, very reusable. So it could just be that a jar was reused for something and carted up, not because of its ability to convey its contents. But obviously there is a very profound concentration right here in this area. Almost 1/4 of all these handles come from one site, and it's not Jerusalem. It's this site right here, Lachish, which is not one of the places named on the handles. Almost 1/4 come from Lachish, and that makes us think that the character of Lachish should provide us a clue for understanding what these things were. But actually what you find when you look at Lachish is that you can use the site and what happens to the site as support for any, practically, of these theories. So here's one of these jars, stamped from Lachish. Here are a couple of these LMLK stamps from that have been found at Lachish. You're looking here again at an aerial view of the site. You remember Lachish, don't you? Big Canaanite site from the Bronze Age. Had the famous ewer. Remember the ewer that we saw multiple times? Came from here. The ewer came from the Fosse Temple, a little temple down here in the old moat. There was also an Acropolis temple. So it was big. It was a big Canaanite site. It becomes a fortified site for the kingdom of Judah. And it is built up as such in the 10th century BC, probably the later part of the 10th century. Lachish is a very critical site strategically for communication with and protection of Jerusalem. It is along one of the main routes from the coast to Jerusalem, and it is a commanding site. So you can see the entryway area of the Iron Age city, and there was a large gate complex right here. You have a plan of Lachish. I handed it out to you guys last time. It's on the flip side of the Beersheba plan. So get that plan out and turn it over, and you'll all be with me. So you're looking today at a view today of the entryway up to the top of the mound at Lachish, but in the 8th century it would have looked like this. Here is that entryway up. There is an outer bastion and then an inner enormous gateway into a very interestingly arranged city. You see from this reconstruction the evidence that the excavations there, both in the 30s and in the 90s, have revealed, which is the front part of the city built up of small, more or less randomly arranged houses, and then a large elevated platform in the middle set off by its own gate complex. And this is a kind of palace fort complex. The whole rest of the site largely unbuilt up, purposefully unbuilt up. And probes in various parts of the site show that there were no houses here, and it could be that it was supposed to allow for refugees. It could have been allowed for troop mustering, for chariots and horses, whatever. So here is what you would see today of the palace fort complex that's in the middle. And from this, you simply get the sense that it sticks up, that it's high. It's on this large stone podium. But this is that complex. It has its own 6-chambered gateway with front towers, a 6-chambered gateway very similar in plan to the Solomonic gateways. Well, not very similar, the same in plan. The difference is that on either side of the gateway are these long pillared halls for storerooms, and another set of storerooms is at the back end of the palatial compound. In this state plan that you're looking at on the screen, this is the Acropolis Temple. So this is the Canaanite Acropolis Temple that is built over by the Iron II Palace Fort. So there's a big wall, a very monumental decided wall that separates the palace fort from the residential area. And you see some of the house excavation here in the residential area. This is a 40-meter long, thick, very don't fool around with me wall. All right, let's have some measurements. This palace compound, 76 by 36 meters. So pretty large. The gateway, the main gateway, the 6-chambered gateway of the city itself is the largest such found in Israel. It's almost 25 meters square. There is a big water system up here on Lachish, just like at Beersheba and Megiddo and Hatzor. This was clearly shared technology, shared know-how. These water cistern systems on the tops of these big mounts. So here's the one at Lachish. And it's very clear that the military or government officials who were protected inside here had a much more elevated lifestyle than the people in here. So the fact that almost 1/4 of the LMLK handles come from Lachish could be seen as evidence for the taxation hypothesis and the idea that this clearly very privileged official area needed to be well supplied, and the fact that there are all of these storerooms here would suggest the same. And indeed, many of those jars come from the storerooms that were excavated here in the palace fort. If they come from there. Yeah, they do. A lot of them come from here. On the other hand, Lachish, clearly being a place of such importance to the kingdom of Judah, and obviously falling into the category of one of Hezekiah the Judite's 46 strong-walled cities, was eyed very seriously by Sennacherib. And indeed, it is the conquest of Lachish, above all, that Sennacherib was most proud of, because it is recorded, this conquest, on a series of wall reliefs that comprise one entire room in the palace of Sennacherib at Nineveh in Assyria. And evidence for that conquest has been found in abundance at Lachish itself. So here is what the site looked like, say, in the middle of the 8th century. But on the eve of Sennacherib's assault, the Assyrians were encamped on the hills above the ravine outside the city, and they had constructed an enormous siege ramp. It is 210 feet wide at the base, 160 feet long, and comprises 15,000 tons of stone. Actually, you can see the siege ramp. This is the siege ramp. The reason that Lachish has this weird connecting link instead of here at one end of at the site, instead of having steep sides here like it does everywhere else, is because this is the ramp that the Assyrians constructed. All right, and so they were planning to break through right here at this point, and obviously to prevent that, the people inside here built an enormous counter ramp. They built a huge bulwark on the inside of the walls, but it was to no avail. So here you're looking at what remains of one of the main gates into the palace of Sennacherib at Nineveh, the Nergal Gate. Some of our armed forces have been helping to reconstruct the walkway and interior walls of the gate. So there's some good work there. So inside this palace, there were excavated by Layard back in the latter part of the 19th century. One whole room with reliefs devoted to this siege. And the words of Sennacherib's prism, how he assaulted the cities with battering rams, are clearly demonstrated. Here you see one part of the relief. Here is the Assyrian siege machine coming up the ramp to the fortified wall of the city. At the top of the tower are Judean defenders. Here you see a detail showing the siege machine not at an angle. So now the city is at an angle, but the siege machine is straight. And you can see how it works on wheels. It sort of looks like a tank, but it has this huge lance that is coming forward to push over and drill a hole through the city. There are flaming torches being thrown above the walls. There are sling stones in the air. There are huge pieces of wall that are crumbling, and there are refugees already filing out of the city. The assault was not only carried on by siege machines, but by archers and sling throwers. And there are actually banks of these on the reliefs. One whole panel has got, there's a wall of archers and sling throwers. And the residue of their activities has been found at the site, 2.5 inches in diameter sling balls, mounds of them, arrows from arrowheads from the arrows. The Assyrians were interested in conquest by terror as well as by power. So when they found prisoners, they impaled them outside the walls as a suggestion to the people still inside that they might want to surrender. And you see some of these prisoners having been propped up on stakes outside the walls here. Inside the city, excavators found disarticulated skulls of defenders, 695 of them, men, women, children. And the numbers presented by Sennacherib in his account, 200,150 prisoners that he took from Judah as a whole, are represented on the reliefs as well in the lines of of people being pushed along by Assyrian soldiers, and the goods and the animals being carted away. You would, oh yeah.
You get that kind of destruction with other Assyrian campaigns, or is it just something that's kind of...
Well, there is no evidence like that, for example, at sites in the north. There's evidence for destruction, but they were not besieged. The reason that Lachish is, we have these kind of remains from Lachish is because it was under siege, a sustained siege, a hard-fought one. And so the punishment was extraordinarily punitive there.
That a lot with like other Assyrian kings, I would assume there have been other sieges. Is it a cultural thing, or is it just how can you get those?
Well, the evidence that we have from the northern area, the northern kingdom, when the various Assyrian conquests, so destroyed cities include Dan, Megiddo, Hatzor, Samaria, and many others, but of the ones that we looked at, there are destruction strata. So there's burned areas, there's toppled walls, but those cities did not put up a fight. So we don't have we don't have this kind of evidence. Where cities put up a fight, probably similar things happened. You would need a correlation that we don't. This is the only place where we have a correlation of a city that put up a monumental fight and a large-scale excavation to recover the remains. But it's also clear that Lachish was a special victory, because it's unique to have an entire set of reliefs devoted to the conquest of one place. So Jerusalem, for example, is also falls to the Assyrians, but it's not conquered that way. The king clearly paid off the king. The king of Judah turns into a tribute king to the king of Assyria and spares his city and his people. He loses independence. So the fight here seems to have been centered at Lachish.
Were the other remains of those 600 something others found?
No.
What do we think happened?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the city, the city of Lachish, you would think. So here's this reconstruction drawing. Here's Lachish. Here's Beersheba. You would think nobody would have ever lived here again, but that's not true. Actually, the whole city is rebuilt and re-inhabited. So the debris in which the skulls were found was covered over by a new layer, which means there were people who came in and cleaned up. Bodies were taken away, people either burned or buried, depending on who it was who took them away. Well, yeah. Yeah. We don't have there's got to be a cemetery associated with the site, but we don't have it. We don't have it excavated.
I was just saying, as far as leaving the skulls there, it seems weird, but some people like skulls. I mean, there was some crazy old guy that lived next to my parents when they lived in South Dakota who kept old skulls on his fence before the government kept taking them down. So I mean, weird thing.
Well, that is weird. This is not like that, because the skulls were found in caches. So like 160 of them were found in the gate area, for example. So the bodies had to have been taken away.
Do you think it was some sort of like offering to the dead?
No.
It's probably a warning. The Assyrians, we know from texts and other places, they like doing things like
That's true. Well, as the impaled bodies would suggest.
The great description from another palace of the Assyrian king having lunch garden with
Yes.
the impaled head of the enemy king hanging from a tree next to him. So,
Right, it's true. The Assyrians were gross this way. That's absolutely correct.
So, if we don't have archaeological evidence of other sorts of, atrocities against cities that put up resistance, there are other textual descriptions.
There are. That's true. That's true. But I mean, it's also the bodies had to have been. These are decapitated. I mean, the skulls are evidence of decapitation, and the bodies were taken away. So the bodies may have been impaled. They may have been burned in a big pyre by the Assyrians. This is part. These are the remains from the final successful Assyrian conquest of the city, taking of the city, and then the mud brick of the upper part of the gate fell in over this. I mean, these skulls were discovered by archaeologists. They were not left for people to be looking at, 20 years later, like weird guy in South Dakota. So the bodies had been removed someplace that we just don't have them anymore, and the skulls were buried, and then so that's why we don't have the bodies to go with them. So take 2 minutes. You get just 2 minutes for this, and come up with as many things in common as you can between these two cities, Lachish and Beersheba. These are two of the strong-walled cities of the 46 that Hezekiah of Hezekiah's cities referred to in Sennacherib's description. You need to make this quick because we need to get to the Philistines, where there are cool things. All right. Tell me something they have in common. They both have pillared storerooms. So they both have special large areas set aside for storage capability. Storage that would seem to be much more than an individual household. Some kind of large, other people bring stuff in from elsewhere for you, storage. Something else. They both have monumentally constructed water supplies. You can't, so the Lachish one is over there, and the Beersheba one is there. It's the little sunken area here in the corner of the citadel. So yes, huge engineering projects that must have required a lot of manpower, a lot of organization. Something else. They're both fortified acropolises, absolutely. They're both fortified acropolises, and they're relatively small fortified acropolises. They're considerably smaller. This is 1/3 the size of Megiddo. Beersheba is 1/3 the size of Megiddo. And Lachish is large, but the area that's in use is relatively small. So strongly fortified citadels, just relatively smaller than the ones of the northern kingdom. Something else. Yes, monumental chambered gateways, 4 chambers at Beersheba, 6 at Lachish. So these impressive, fortified, single-entry ways into the city. So not only strong, but impressive. And this is a tradition, these multi-chambered gateways. This is certainly a Solomonic tradition. You don't have to believe all 3 parts of the Solomonic gateway theory of Yadin to recognize that at least at Hatzor and Gezer, there had been in the 10th century, that's when we first see these sorts of gateways. So that is the tradition that is being continued, and it is, of course, shared by the fortified cities of the north. Both fortified cities of the north and south have this exact same kind of gateway.
Do you get the same kind of gateways in other cultures, or is this like strictly Israel?
This kind of gateway, I don't know of any examples outside of Israel or Judah. There are gateways, but not this particular arrangement of either 4 or 6.
Solomon or the Solomonic architecture where we did that kind of combined Israelite gate?
Yeah. I think that's right. I'm not positive about that, and in Larry Herr's article, he definitely will say it's possible that there's some. I don't know of one offhand. I can't think of something from Phoenicia or from Edom or Moab or Philistia. Certainly, and there's certainly nothing prior to that I know of to those 10th century ones. So even if there would be one later, it could be modeled on the 10th century examples or anybody else's subsequent example, like the one at Megiddo from the 9th century, for example.
Say that that's part of what they would have thought as their Israelite or Judean identity.
Well, it's when you have something that's architecturally specific like that, and then it's utilized over and over, you could make that argument. You could say that is somebody entering the city would have associated that kind of entryway with these people. It's not just the gateway. There are benches inside the gate chambers. So they are, and there are references very periodically in the Hebrew Bible to, for example, judging that goes on there. So officials, religious officials, military officials, government officials, social, not exactly officials, but like chiefs. These were gathering areas. So yeah, you could make. I think you could make that argument. Something else.
Can we say that these are both administrative centers, although Beersheba's a complete administrative center? That's like a temple, palace, complex, whatever. What is that?
Yes, they are both administrative centers. Absolutely. And what they indicate is, again, this very clear bifurcation of status. That you have these well-supplied, both in goods and in water, fortified, protected sites, and these were the centers for all of the small settlements that would have been in the area around. So there's a whole class, an official class, military and or official, who are housed in places like this. And that's the same as the Northern Kingdom, too. We have good evidence of that. And that's a clear shift from the only such place that we have from IronIIa like that, which is the stratum at Megiddo, where there are those 2 palaces, but there's also houses up there on the Acropolis, and everything is all together in one. Palaces, larger houses, smaller houses, all kind of mixed up together. Now there's a very specific division between these classes. What else? They are on the edges of Judah. They are on the edges of Judah. Lachish on the edge against Philistia. Beersheba on the edge against the tribes of the Negev and probably also the Edomites. This line, which looks, this bright pink dotted line, which makes it look impassable, is just completely misleading because there were Edomites living all through here in the Iron Age, and Beersheba is the fortified center for all of the Judean towns down here in the south, just up against the border of Edom and the Negev. So building up marks the borders of this kingdom. You may recall what marks the borders of the northern kingdom of Israel. That was 2 religious sites, Dan and Bethel. We don't have that here because there is a continual effort on the part of the king, of the Judean king, to make Jerusalem the only religious site. A continuing effort because he's continuously unable to, king after king is unable to effect that. In the same conquest of Hezekiah the Judite, actually a little earlier in the account in the prism, I told you that there were two main targets that Sennacherib had. The second was Judah. The first was Philistia. So in my third campaign, Sennacherib takes the throne in 704. So he wastes no time. Every year he campaigns. In his third year, in 701, in his third campaign, he went against Lule, king of Sidon, Achziv, Akko. The terrors of the weapons of Assur, my lord, overpowered them. They bowed in submission at my feet. But Sitka, the king of Ashkelon, who had not submitted to my yoke, the gods of his father's house, himself, his wife, his sons, his daughters, his brothers, the seed of his paternal house, I tore away and brought to Assyria. So this is a less compelling siege account than that of Lachish, but also Ekron. There had been some hanky-panky going on here at Ekron. There had been a coup. There is a king. The king is named Padi. And the noble people of Ekron had rebelled against Padi. Padi had been giving tribute to the Assyrian king. And the nobles and his upper classes, his officials, apparently didn't want him to do that. So they joined the rebellion that was organized by Sitka. And as a consequence, Sennacherib approaches Ekron, slew the governors and nobles who had rebelled, hung their bodies on stakes around the city. The inhabitants who rebelled and treated Assyria lightly, I counted as spoiled. The rest of them who were not guilty of rebellion and contempt, I declared their pardon. Padi, their king, who had actually been sent as a kind of hostage to Hezekiah, is released and brought back and set over the royal throne, and royal tribute is imposed. So Philistia, like Judea, is brought under the tributary arm of Assyria. Now, in the case of Judah and Hezekiah's cities, this is not a region capable of agricultural surplus. It's just not fertile enough. And so it's not worth making that big a deal about. The kings of Judah are allowed to continue to serve on the throne, and they are required to pay periodic tribute to the kings of Assyria. Philistia, on the other hand, is an area that can be exploited agriculturally, and that is clearly what happens after the Assyrian conquest of the end of the 8th century. So we're back here again at Mikneh. You remember Mikneh because this is one of the sites that we had such good evidence of the Sea People / Philistine settlement of in Iron I. At that time, there had been a small settlement only on the Acropolis from the Late Bronze Age. The Philistines had settled it, and in Iron I, all of the city was turned into a big urban center. And it was occupied that way for a couple of hundred years. But by Iron II, by the 10th century, the growing consolidated power of the United Monarchy under David and Solomon led to the diminution of the size of most of the major Philistine sites, and especially Ekron, which is the most inland of the Philistine sites, and right here near the edge of the border of Judah. So Ekron continued to be inhabited, but only up here on the Acropolis. So the entire lower city was abandoned. But after the Assyrian conquest, the lower city was again settled. Like Hezekiah and his successors, the kings of Ekron, just like the kings of the other Philistine cities, remain monarchs of their town. They turn into vassal kings, client kings, kings who are the middleman between their town and their people and the Assyrian king. And as long as they continue to supply the Assyrian king with money, tribute, produce, everything's fine. So down in the middle of the lower city, right next to where old buildings 350 and 351 had been, the large hearth official cult buildings of the Iron I period, right next to that, another huge temple complex is constructed. And you see that complex in aerial view here, and you have a plan of that on your handout. And this complex has an enormous courtyard and storerooms, a single actual entry. The entry goes into the courtyard, and then from the courtyard, you're funneled into a long hallway. At one end of the hallway, the hallway here is called a throne room, possibly because there's this raised dais at one end that the excavators have interpreted as a throne. And then there's actually a cult room, a sanctuary. There are 2 rows of pillars, and you can see those pillars here. So this diagonal wall is this diagonal wall. And then there are a bunch of rooms around that sanctuary in which a whole slew of fantastic, wealthy, exotic stuff has been found. But at the back end of the sanctuary, right here, was found an inscription. I show you here the excavators of Tel Mikne, Sagit, and Trudy Dotan. You'll see them again in a few minutes in another slide. They find great stuff, and they write a lot about McNay, and it's all wonderful. And every time they find something really fun and cool, there's a picture of the 2 of them posing with it, looking like, looking all intense, like they're actually working on the stuff. It's so cute. So here's Sion Trudy pretending to read the inscription. So the inscription is really fascinating. First of all, it is in the Philistine alphabet. Philistine alphabet looks to be an adaptation of the Phoenician alphabet, just like the Hebrew one was. It is an official inscription, like Hezekiah's tunnel inscription. It's in beautiful, easy-to-read carved letters, right to left. This temple was built by Lachish, son of Padi, son of Yasid, son of Ada, son of Yair. So there's a whole royal lineage. Ruler of Ekron, for some female deity with an unpronounceable name, his divine lady. May she bless him and guard him and prolong his days and bless his land. Many, many interesting things about this inscription. One is the alphabet that I already told you. The second is the reference to Padi, who we know of from both 2 Kings and Sennacherib's Chronicles. The lineage telling us that there has been a king in charge of Ekron for 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 5 generations. The name Padi and Yasid and Ada and Yair, those are Semitic. But this, the son of Padi, the person who built the temple, this is not a Semitic name. It's an Indo-European root, and it sounds very, very much like Achaean, which is to say the Greeks. And the deity, this deity is also a not Semitic name, and the closest semantic match is, and for the details of this you can read the article that you have by Sai in your course pack, the Pythia. The Pythia is the oracular deity of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi in Greece, suggesting that memories of and continued continued adherence to a Greek background remained part of Philistine self-identity. The temple complex has a lot of wealthy finds in it, of all sorts. Greek pottery, this is from the Ionian Islands. This is a little Egyptian amulet. And this is a uraeus, that is to say, a headpiece of an Egyptian crown with a cobra, a standing cobra on the end. Some of the objects in the Padi temple have the cartouches of Egyptian pharaohs long dead, Merneptah, Ramses VI. So these are either gifts or loot acquired or taken from temples in Egypt. There are also a number of hoards of cut-up silver. These are very, very interesting. I bring them up now because we're going to, in the next, once we get all done with the Iron Age and we talk about it and then we move on, the period that we move on into, the Persian period, is the first period for which we have coins. And when we get to that, I'll come back to this because that may be the first period in which we have coins, but it's not the first period in which we have a system of bullion, weight, being used as an exchange mechanism. That starts with the Assyrians, and this is the evidence for it. These packets of cut up, hacked up silver that are found in caches and that measure out to precise amounts. Sometimes there will be a bunch of, in another context there have been found bunches of this stuff hacked up and in a sort of bundle or in a pot sealed with a stamp, so suggesting that it's been weighed and measured. And some pretty interesting cult items, all associated with a female divinity, like the inscription, which blesses or thanks a female divinity. So here are two statuettes, a couple of inscriptions to Asheret. This is the back end of a jar handle that actually, there are three letters over here that say Kuf Dalet Shin Kodesh, holy to Aleph Shin Resh Tav, Asheret, like Astarte, Asheret, this female divinity. Here is a silver medallion that shows another female divinity on some animal. Who knows what animal this is? And there is a priest or an acolyte in front with his hands up, and she may be blessing him or something like that. She has reins for this animal, so she's a kind of mistress of beasts figure. So the continued veneration of a female deity seems also to have remained part of Philistine identity. So that is the temple areas here in the middle of the city. And in this last 3.5 minutes, we'll tell you what else the Assyrians oversee as part of the transformation of Philistine life. Down at the southern end of the lower city, so down here, you can see one of the excavations area here, a series of excavation areas have been opened and discovered something really astonishing, an enormous complex of olive oil factories. 115 of these things have been discovered, one after another. And they are 3 rooms and 3 parts. One room is oil presses. For more details of all of this, you can read both Larry Herr's article and Cy Gittin's article. So one room is the pressing room, and there are big weights found in those rooms. Another room is the purification room for the oil. There's settling tanks. And then the third room is for weaving, actually. There is because oil, the accumulation of olive oil can only be done about 4 months out of the year. I mean, there's the season. You get the olives, and then you press them. So the rooms were used also in the rest of the year to produce other goods needed by the Assyrians, including textiles. Inside practically all the rooms, in all of the three-room complexes, in the middle room is a little built podium with a small altar, a small horned altar. Here's Cy and Trudy again. A few years earlier than when they found the inscription. Cy looks younger. And this is nice, actually, because you can get a sense of how small they are. Many of them are very tiny. Why horned altars here now in Philistia? There are lots of guesses or explanations. Who's the workforce making all this olive oil? 1,000 tons annually could be produced from these presses. They could be refugees from the northern kingdom. They could be transferred workers from the southern kingdom. So in other words, they could be Israelites and Judeans moved into Philistia. Or, I mean, it doesn't actually have to be either or. These altars can be evidence of the adoption by the people who live here, the Philistines, of cult ritual rites practiced by their neighbors to the north and the east. Can't prove one way or the other which it is. I am not going to talk about weights because I don't have any time, and I'm not going to talk about a rod because I don't have any time. So I'm just going to tell you that the whole experiment, the whole new workforce and tributary kingdoms overseen by Assyria in the 7th century comes to a close because the Babylonians, in the year 612, conquer Nineveh, and it falls. And then, in a rapid series of expansion moves by various Babylonian kings, first the Philistine cities of Ashkelon and Ekron and all the rest of the Philistine cities are completely decimated. This is the destruction debris of 605, 604 from Ashkelon and Ekron. This is the Padi temple. This is one of the side rooms with a bunch of store jars. And, of course, in 586, Jerusalem too falls to the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar III, a destruction layer 2.5 meters thick everywhere throughout the city of David and on the western hill. You see Babylonian arrowheads found in the soil and somebody holding a pile of them here. And it's not that everybody in the area leaves, as we will soon find out, although many people are exiled. But the period of history known as the First Temple period, right here, comes to an end with this conquest. And what happens after that will be the subject of what we move on to next. So discussion day next time. Papers are due.